And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by my guest, Robert. Robert reached out to me. He has a couple of experiences of his own, but he also had mentioned that his grandfather had served in Vietnam, and him and some other members of the military were having run-ins with what they called Rock Apes. That really piqued my interest. But it didn't just stop there. Robert's grandparents also ran into something that could have been possibly a Jersey Devil. It was up in the Pine Barrens around New Jersey, which Robert also believes that back in 2018, he also had a run-in with something that could have possibly been a Jersey Devil. A lot of stuff to unpack in this episode. Before we bring Robert on, if you've ever had an experience or a story you'd like to share, there's two things you can do. You can email tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to the website tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Both ways work, so whichever you prefer to do, just get at me and we'll get something scheduled. If you'd like to help the podcast out, please continue to share it. Word of mouth is what helps the podcast grow. The more people that find out about Tinfoil Tales, the more chances are they're going to have some stories to share and come on here and talk about their experiences. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to Tinfoil Tales at. If you write out a review, I'll make sure to read it and give you a shout out on a future episode. There is a Patreon that you can join. Starting to get a few members here and there. Definitely appreciate you guys. I've been adding new exclusive content just to the Patreon. It's worth checking out. It's only $1.99 a month, so less than $2. You get early access to all the episodes right after they're recorded, plus they're all ad-free. And then obviously the exclusive content's on there as well. You can find more information in the show notes. Make sure to follow us on all the social medias, Facebook, X, Instagram. There's a profile out there on Facebook, Brandon Tinfoil Tales. You happen to see it on there, go ahead and add me. You can shoot me a message. I'd like to connect with you. I think now it's time to bring Robert on. Definitely looking forward to talking with him. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Robert. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. You want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Robert. I lived in a small town in Pennsylvania known as Langhorne. Langhorne has a very historical background. A lot of important figures during, especially the Revolution, passed through. Everyone, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, It was also a very important place that was used to deal with a lot of soldiers moving through. So there was a lot of stuff relating to medical and stuff. And just in general, the town has a lot of history.
Where did you say this was again? I'm sorry.
Langhorne, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's about 30 minutes. It's right outside of Philadelphia. Everyone, when I say it, it's like, oh, Philadelphia, because anything in Pennsylvania is in reference to Philadelphia.
Is that anywhere close to Gettysburg?
Gettysburg, I'm going to say it's like 45 minutes off of the turnpike from Gettysburg.
Okay. That's usually when someone talks about that area, I always think of Gettysburg, but I've never been there.
Yeah, it's close. It's Dale 45 minutes, not particularly far.
I always heard that Gettysburg is one of the most haunted places in the country.
It very much is. And as a matter of fact, I'm planning a little excursion around Halloween. Uh, heard a local legend about a bridge that has to do with a pig farmer, and I'm interested in finding out more about that.
Weirdly enough, there was an urban legend that the just a few miles north of where I live, there was a old swine slaughterhouse, and they claim it didn't burn down. And if you drive up the road, sometimes you can still see the barn, even though it was gone. And I always drove up there; I never seen it, so I don't know where that whole story came from. But that was one of the urban legends that there was a swine barn, like a slaughterhouse or whatever, that wasn't too far from here, and certain nights you could still see where it was at. And I was like, I never saw it. I've lived here my whole life.
Well, as a matter of fact, this is a little more brutal. Um, a pig farmer let loose his pigs on a bunch of Confederate soldiers who were wounded.
Hmm.
So there's a little interesting backstory to the bridge. So I'm interested in finding out a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would too. Something like that always piqued my interest. But you mentioned some stuff that your grandfather experiences, and you've had some experiences. Everything. Is there something you want to start off talking about?
Maybe I'll start off from the beginning.
Okay.
Um, so my family, going back to the old countries from Italy, and my grandmother, as I was growing up, told me that my great 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 grandmothers and their family and all the women in their family were um, good witches. They were uh, practiced herbal remedies and stuff like that, and performed herbal magics and stuff like that. Um, so with that, I guess the family was a little more in tune with the other side of things. Um, Going through, uh, my great grandmother actually, she lived in Bristol, PA, which is 30 minutes from Langhorne, right on the border with Jersey. During 1909, she was alive for the Jersey Devil and his escapades through Bristol. Um, she said that the police were coming through looking for it. There were hoof prints on going down the street on the roofs of the houses in the snow. And everybody was freaking out because of that. And it just so happened to be funny that they did dealt with that. And also in the area, they dealt with a lot of ghost related stuff. There's a if you Next to Bristol, there's Croydon, and Croydon has a history of um, ghosts and spiritual stuff to the point that they actually have a road named after it here. Let's see. Uh, they renamed one of the streets Ghost Street because it's like every house is pretty much haunted, and they renamed the street like Ghost Lane.
Hmm. Kind of
And
kind of
hmm,
interesting considering they would name it something, I guess, from all the reports.
uh, the local kids, my grandmother told me that a lot of the kids would, because everybody knew everybody, everybody was at each other's houses, and that a lot of the houses there were back from the 1800s, if not earlier. And they all had the basements that had the dirt floors. And the one house, particularly, the kids would stay out of it because they could hear, even though there was nothing in the basement, they could hear the sound of rope going taut and pressure being put on the beams in the basement, even though there was nobody there.
Hmm.
So that was my great grandmother. Uh, my grandfather served in Vietnam. While he was over in country, he was Navy attached to the Marines in Da Nang, where he was put in charge of an armory. Part of his duties for the armory was he was responsible for setting traps outside of the barbed wire and the deployment of Agent Orange to kill the foliage around the base. While he was on base, the base would have daily daily and nightly interactions with 4.5, 5 foot tall apes that the servicemen and the locals just thought were commonplace. The locals respected them. The GIs loved to mess with the apes. The apes would always throw rocks over the barbed wire at the GIs. The GIs would throw the rocks back and would just mess with the apes. Whenever the apes would show up, they'd shoot at the apes, and they never batted an eye.
Did he ever say what they looked like?
He said that they were 4.5, 5 feet tall, looked dark brown, orangutan-esque, gorilla-esque, but very built. More built than an orangutan. I assume that's where he got the gorilla-like build from it.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just chuck rocks. And most of the time they would be walking around on all fours, but they would run on two legs. And he just thought they were regular animals because of just how often they saw them.
I wonder if
Uh,
I'm not familiar with the whole Vietnam region or the type of animals and stuff that live there. Is there a natural primate that you're aware of that lives in that area?
so it wasn't until later that I found out that there were no naturally occurring primates in Vietnam. This was, I was reading into it, especially hearing about other Bigfoot type creatures in Asia, like the Yeren and stuff like that, and just looking into it. And there aren't any ape species like that in Vietnam. And it was funny because how commonplace it was for those soldiers. A lot of soldiers who were in other parts of the country were told not to talk about it.
I'm still trying to process here. Like the size to me doesn't really fit the typical Sasquatch, Bigfoot type size. They're only 4.5, 5 feet, but I don't know what type of primate that would be. Obviously, it's the same size as like an orangutan or a chimp, but it doesn't necessarily match the whole Sasquatch unless they're like juveniles.
So, what I've been looking into is that it's just because of how dense the foliage is, all the bamboo and stuff like that, it isn't in the mountainous regions and stuff like that, it isn't conducive to be bigger, I think, or at least that's what it's looking like. I have seen that there are other people who have talked about there being bigger ones, but the ones that my grandfather saw were the biggest was like 5.5 maybe. But reading into it, there is no native species to Vietnam.
Kind of makes you wonder what it could have possibly been, though. Just, it's strange. Did he ever say if anyone else had dealt with them too?
All the soldiers knew about it. It was commonplace. It
Hmm.
was one of the first things he learned about. He also, it, first thing off the helicopter, first thing that he was told about was that the buzzing sound around his head is not bees, those are bullets. Uh, the weird croaking sounds that sounded like you were being cursed at. There was a type of gecko, he said, some type of reptile that the GIs were referred to as the FU lizard because it would croak and it would sound like FU, which was another thing that they thought was funny. And then it was the Rock Apes. And they just like, it's commonplace. I don't know what to tell you. Um, but throughout his time there and the attacks in as the war continued on, the sightings became less and less as the area around the base became more and more destroyed.
Kind of makes
Which
you,
mean,
it's like, kind of makes you wonder then. There's been reports of all sorts of these weird cryptid type primates and other things too, all over. And it's typical for the like the people that live there, like that are native to the area. It's pretty much commonplace, but when an outsider would come in there and they see something strange or whatever, I'm surprised I haven't heard more reports of people saying they've seen these things. Because when you originally reached out and messaged me, it piqued my interest because and I could just be, I haven't looked into it very much. I'll be the first to admit I don't know everything because it's not really anything that I dive into that often. But I've not heard anyone talk about encountering stuff like that when they're over in Vietnam.
it
So it's just strange to me that if a lot of people knew about it, I wonder why there wasn't more reports about it.
so that's the thing. I genuinely believe that if you told a GI that he always talked about the Rock Apes, it was a commonplace thing. And if you talk to somebody, a Vietnam vet, and you talk to them about rock apes, and then you explain to them that there are no indigenous ape species to Vietnam, especially matching that description, you will probably be told the same thing, but it was commonplace. Or you'll have the other half of them, which there have been reports of chopper gunners that have seen them flying as they were flying over. They've looked down and see groups of them moving through the foliage or on mountaintops and stuff like that. And they were told by higher ups to not talk about it. That you have it's either one or the other. You have the people that thought it was commonplace, and then you have the people that were told not to talk
Yeah. Kind of seems like that's what goes on into when you go down that rabbit hole with a lot of cryptids or whatever. It always seems like there's someone else that doesn't want people to talk about it. And then the people that do talk about it, 90% of the time people think you're crazy.
exactly. And it's so with what I do, I'm part of a local American Legion in the town of Langhorne, and I'm trying to collect stories, just in general, the stories of soldiers, of service members who have served, and try and get stuff. But I also like to hear the weird stuff that they saw. That's just my own twisted curiosity. But a
Hmm.
lot of them, especially now that we're getting very low on our World War II vets. We're getting very low on our Korean War vets, and the Vietnam vets are getting pretty low too. Trying to reach out and find these stories that need to be told before they are lost.
Because once they're gone, I mean, stories kind of just go off with them too.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I want to find uh, a lot of these. I want to specifically find more Vietnam vets who have had Rock Ape stories because it would sort of confirm that there were in other parts of the country that these were being seen and bring credence to what others have been saying. And who knows, maybe if you get a few of them talking about it together, you'll find others that have seen stuff.
Yeah. You never know when it comes to stuff like that, though. I don't know. People are so set in their ways these days, too, that it's hard to get people to talk about things. Yeah.
It is very taboo, I will say that, especially with your being held to a higher standard, being in the military,
Mm-hmm.
being a vet, and stuff like that.
But that generation itself, they're a different breed of what people were then to what we are today. I think today with technology and doing what we're doing right now with the podcast and everything else, like there's more openness to an extent for what we do today, but that older generation that's not as in depth into it like we are, to them it's still very taboo.
Mm-hmm.
No, I've been noticing that just trying to interview people about anything. Like the older generations, they're still very much reserved when it comes to talking about things.
Especially the older generations that were raised heavily religious,
Hmm.
where it was just, you just don't talk about it, especially, oh, it's blasphemous or it's witchcraft.
Yeah, there's that aspect, and there's a lot of other just, and I don't know how to properly say it without maybe sounding like a dick, but they didn't want the backlash. I think like they were too. I don't know what the term would be. Like they were too. I wouldn't say sensitive, but they didn't want people to look at them like there was something wrong with them. They had more
If
pride in themselves, I guess.
it was, I think, because everything was more tight knit well, I mean, things are tight knit now, but it was tight knit communities, but those communities themselves were closed off. And when you have a person talk about, oh, I saw this or I saw that, and then you become the town weirdo.
Hmm.
And
I think I'm
yeah,
gaining that notoriety these days doing the podcast and talking about the things that I talk about. So,
yeah, trust me, I know. People are like, oh, huh. And it's funny because we'll talk about it later, but one of the other members of the Legion, he's the head of the historical society for the town, and he collects haunted stuff. And then when he finally joined, I was like, yay, I'm not alone. And
yeah,
he's an older gentleman.
I think most people, once they find out what you do and everything, people talk to me about the podcast. Are like, "Do you really believe in all that stuff?" I mean, I'm skeptical, but I'm very open minded. So it's like I'm not going to say what people are saying is wrong because I don't know. I don't think any of us really know. So,
It's, I, so going into it and being, so having a pretty religious upbringing. There were certain taboos that you wouldn't talk about, like I was raised by my grandparents. My parents weren't in the picture, and thus I had a different type of upbringing than most kids my age. Um, being 25 and being raised by your grandparents, there's a sort of disconnect I had between other kids my age. And it also didn't help that I had a the more religious upbringing, but it was also very taboo to especially everybody's playing with Ouija boards nowadays. I really don't know why.
Yeah.
Everybody just loves poking beehives,
I
and
I don't understand it personally, but that's just me.
yeah, it's funny because that's actually partially how my grandparents got married. So my grandfather was on base in California, and he and his buddies were playing with a Ouija board, and supposedly the table that they were playing with the Ouija board on started to levitate when he asked who he was going to marry, who my grandfather was going to marry, and it spelled out my grandmother's name. And that was the last time he ever touched a Ouija board. So I was told never touch a Ouija board, especially with all the stuff that has happened uh, as I was growing up. There was always stuff moving in our house. In our house, we my grandparents were the first people to actually live there. Um, so there wasn't really a reason why the house should have been haunted to begin with. So, but the hauntings were harmless. So my grandmother always believed that with certain things that it was other family members having that connection to the old witch heritage. It was just old family members coming in, stopping by, moving stuff, always finding pennies or change from heaven. And you would just have, like rocking chairs that would start rocking back and forth, even though there's no wind or anything. The normal stuff. Um, I also, uh, the town itself, before we go into, I'll give a more rundown, but the town itself actually is sitting on a quarry. Like it's within short distance of a quarry, and it's also that has a river running through it, and that river uh, had a local native population, and so there's a lot going on there as far as stuff with the local uh, Indian population, and that also led into more Revolutionary War stuff. So the whole town's just got crazy activity, and it might be because of the quarry and the river, but
Water sources are usually a conduit for weird energy.
very much. So this river runs through the town. Well, it has off branching little streams and stuff that feed into it, and a lot of it go through the town. There is a bank. I'll give a few of the ghost stories for the town. So, first of all, we'll start with the Revolutionary War ones. There were so many wounded troops coming through during the Revolution that the local tavern in the town was used as a field hospital. The tavern was used as a field hospital, and across the street was a house, and a little girl lived in the second story. And the Historic Society has her journal. And in her journal, she wrote about all the soldiers that died because they were constantly moving through and they didn't really have time to give them a proper burial. They buried them in the backyard of this house. They gave them a very shallow grave. Uh, so during the wintertime, the bodies would go in, and come the spring, fall, with all the rain that we get here, and there's a lot of clay in the uh, earth, the water would just sit, and therefore the body parts would just come out. And she would write about how that arms and stuff would come out of the ground. Uh, Eventually, they would move a lot of the bodies, not all of them, to down the street, and then up a little bit. There was a wrought iron fence, and there's this very nice house there, and there's a lot of property. And it wasn't until recently, like early 2000, so like 2005-ish, that the Historic Society found out that there was a mass grave in the backyard. And they found out that it's not just soldiers that were fighting, not just Patriot soldiers, but there were also British soldiers, and there were Hessian soldiers, because Washington and other members of the government told the local townspeople, take care of everybody no matter what side they're fighting in and fighting on. And so a lot of people were buried there. There isn't any indication, or there was nothing left with names. So a lot of these, it's just one giant unmarked mass grave with not just Patriot soldiers, but Hessians and redcoats, British soldiers mixed in. And with that, the local historic society, who runs the ghost tours, had actually brought a medium in, and the medium was able to make contact with a few of the Patriot soldiers, as well as a British and Hessian soldier, and they were able to get like a handful of names, uh, only 3 full names and partial names for a handful of others.
When you mentioned the arms and stuff coming out of the ground, that would have been a freaky thing to see. That would have, I don't know. Obviously, back in the old days or whatever, it'd be a little bit different. But like in modern times, if I ever went out and I seen bodies starting to come out of the ground, I'd be a little terrified.
So the house that girl lived in, she was like 10 at the time, 10, 12. You can actually see from street level where her window was. It's bricked up now, but you can see the outline of where the windowsill used to be. There has not been construction or any excavation done to the backyard of that house. and I'd be very interested to see what they would find. But I don't like messing with the dead. I feel like that would be curiosity says one thing, my conscience says another thing. I say keep it. We found the mass grave down the street, and that was just on accident. There was nothing to indicate that there was anything there except the wrought iron fence, but there's a lot of walls and stuff around the town that harken back from when the town was founded. So when it, the house that was there on that property got turned into a very nice restaurant. The very nice restaurant was doing its parking lot. In the process of doing the parking lot, they found the mass grave, which is right on the edge of the parking lot. They really a memorial was put up recently in honor of the soldiers and stuff that are there. There's constantly stuff being added to it as we find out more. And eventually, I think they're going to bring in some curators from in the city, from museums from in the city, to come down and look at it. But that's going to take a lot of resources.
It'd be interesting to find what they ended up discovering.
I do know that the bodies that are there, I believe it was described to me that they are all in pine wood, like very improvised coffins, and I think they're stacked 4 or 5 high down, and they don't know how many wide, but it's a decent amount.
Yeah. I'd be interested
Another
to see what happens with all that.
it's an ongoing process. There's a lot of legal stuff that goes into it. Because then you're like, oh, you want to dig up the surrounding properties, and you know how people can get when you're like, oh, the town wants to dig up your property. And a lot of people don't want to be told that there's a mass grave underneath their backyard.
It's weird because for what I do, like outside of podcast, real life stuff, we have, like, I'm in construction order. So if they were ever to come across certain burial grounds or anything, they're not allowed to do any sort of weird, like, construction. They couldn't build a parking lot on top of dead people. Like, if they were known to be there, there'd have to have been a whole different zoning and locating and all sorts of different things. And you have to get approval to move the bodies. So it's weird that they would have built something on top of unless they just didn't know about it.
I'm pretty sure that, so if you're looking at the street, so if you're standing in the street and you're looking at where the memorial is, to your right you have the parking lot and the restaurant, and to your left you have a line of pine trees, and then you have a house and a bank. There's a lot of banks in the town, and a bank that has a parking lot in the back. And I'm pretty sure that the houses, or what the house that the bank used to be, was built on top of it. So I don't know what the legal rights to having something that was built there before, like say something that was built in the 1800s. I don't know what the legal precedent for that is if something was pre-existing before we found that.
Yeah, I don't know how any of that would have went on. But
So though that's the first thing. There's so the tavern that was used as a field hospital, that's haunted. They, of course, you have silverware being thrown, you've got glasses being thrown. Just in general, I don't think there's been reports of apparitions. That has yet to be seen. There is a bank that is close to the Legion, and the Legion actually backs up to the house where that girl was, where the bodies were buried.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the bank is catty corner to the Legion. The bank is haunted. And when I was running the ghost tours about 10-ish years ago, the main story that is told is that the local police have been called at least twice to the sensor in the vault going off while the bank's been closed. So the local police would get dispatched that the bank is being robbed, show up, guns drawn and everything, and they'd go in and they'd find out that there's nobody inside. And it would constantly trip, even though there needs to be something solid in front of it. And I'm not talking dust or anything. There needs to be, the way it was described to me is there are two plane, like a body needs to be standing so that it breaks both of the laser planes in order to set it off.
Hmm.
So while we were giving a tour of that bank, a teenager had 12, 13, had found a quarter lying on the ground. He picks it up. I see him pick it up, think nothing of it. We're continuing the tour through the bank, people doing, taking pictures and stuff like that. And we hear change drop. So I instantly look at the kid thinking he dropped the quarter. Little did I know that it was on the other side of the room where nobody was standing. He picks up that quarter. I'm like, okay. We get outside and we're walking down the back, and to give you an idea, is it's a 4-lane, or it's a stop sign, and it goes 4 ways, and there are houses going down either side, and they're like townhouses. So there are also, because it's a Saturday night, there are cars parked on either side of the street. So cars would have to go down center of the street in order to get down the street. We're walking down the sidewalk, and that's when everybody starts hearing dings off the cars. To give clarity, there are pine trees, and at first I was thinking it was pine cones until it starts causing the car alarms to go off. And I'm starting to get weirded out because it's a metal ding, and the kid realizes that it's raining change in the middle of the street. Hands down, one of the weirdest things I've seen.
When you mentioned the coin, it brought up something that happened to me years ago. I don't honestly know if I've ever talked about it on this show or not. I might have mentioned on something before, but there was a place not too far from where I live, and I don't want to give any details just because I know they don't like people going out there. But where it was an old cemetery, and we were teenagers at the time, so it's been 20-something years ago. But we went out there one night, and we started to walk towards the woods, and towards the edge of the woods, there was a coin sitting on top of a tomb, like a headstone. And for whatever reason, my jackass friend decided he was going to take that coin. And it was it was either a 50-cent piece or a silver dollar. It was a bigger silver coin.
Okay.
And then after he picked it up, we're like, what are you doing? Don't take that. I'm superstitious. So I'm like, don't take that. Put that back. And after he picked it up, a lot of weird stuff happened. Like we started hearing noises. It got real dark. We started hearing like dogs barking, but the area had dogs anyway, so I don't say that was anything related, but there's just weird noises out in the woods and stuff, and it almost sounded like there's like a chanting type weirdness to it, just very strange. And finally, we convinced him to take it back. Well, we were up by the vehicle, and he didn't want to walk all the way back through the woods and stuff to put it back, so he said, "Screw it," and chucks it, and that made me mad because I'm like, seriously, like someone left that there for a reason. And you're being disrespectful and you picked it up and you took it and then you just chucked it. So we were kind of mad. We left. I made him come back with me the next morning. Me and my buddy and one of the other ones were coming home. So we're actually staying down at our other friend's house that night. And we stopped back out there the next day and hand to a Bible, whatever. We parked in that same spot. There's no spots, like just a gravel driveway. When we got out, as soon as we got out, right where we had parked, right on the ground is a silver dollar. I saw him chuck it. I saw it go flying off in the darkness. What is the likelihood that that silver dollar, or there would be two, and one just so happens to be right where we seen him throw it?
Yeah, that'll the change thing. I'm 95% sure that it goes back to the whole, you got to leave coins with the dead so that they can pay so they can cross the river Styx.
Mm-hmm.
I personally leave quarters on my grandfather's headstone so that he can play cards. But change in the paranormal, I really don't know what it is, but the connection's weird.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm not super into the paranormal in the sense of I think everything's paranormal. So that's the one thing that stuck with me because I don't know how to explain it other than the fact there could have been two possible coins, which is very strange. There'd be two silver dollars or 50-cent pieces, like regardless.
And especially right there.
Yeah, in the same exact spot. 'Cause literally, we just got out. We parked in the same exact area, like on this gravel driveway. It's not like a one lane. So we parked in this driveway, and you get out of the car, and right at the edge of the gravel, right where the grass starts, is a 50-cent piece. And we were standing right by the car when he chucked it off into the woods. He didn't just drop it on the ground. We seen him throw it. So the likelihood of that being the same exact area is very strange to me. So we picked it up and I made him put it back. And I don't know, it was just very weird. Then after that happened, him and I were the only two that touched it. And for like the next couple of weeks when we got together, like bad stuff seemed to happen. I was like, now we're cursed. Which I don't really believe in that type of stuff, but it was weird that anytime him and I were together, we got into a car crash a week later with another buddy, and then later on we ended up almost getting arrested for something we didn't do. Like we were at our other buddy's house and they're supposed to be having a party and we were the only ones there, and they apparently called the police. Underage kids there for a party. Whole bunch of crazy stuff, teenage years.
That's yeah, no, that's especially considering the fact he took it off of a tombstone. You're
No.
desecrating a grave or taking something from someone, so that would cause something. This seemed more like a prank. Like, I still to this day constantly think about how it could possibly have been raining change in the middle of a street that has all the houses are 2-story houses. Unless there is somebody who climbed the pine trees and is throwing out handfuls of change, I cannot explain that.
No, I don't know how to go. Like I said, I've always been interested in this stuff, and it kind of just I'm superstitious, which I really don't know why, but I've always just somewhat been superstitious, and picking up something from a grave or anything like to me that's disrespectful in general. That's not how I am as a person,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that's why we were like begging with him, like, dude, just go put it back. Like, don't be that jackass. Like, that's someone put that there for a reason. Like, don't take it. Like,
A loved one probably put it there,
yeah.
and you just broke that bond.
The weird part about it is where it was at the very back of the cemetery. Like, it was often towards the woods. Like, you had to actually go all the way through it, and then like it wasn't really. It was part of the cemetery, but it was like not part of the cemetery. Like, it was right on the edge where the wood line is, like away from everything else. So it was like kind of off the beaten path for this random headstone. So I don't know. I don't remember reading it. To be 100% honest, I think I've only been out there one more time, and we did not go back that way just because I was like, no, I don't even want to mess with it. Again, that was 20 something years ago.
So you're saying that it was off the beaten path and it wasn't, is it a soul headstone? Like it's just by itself?
If I remember right, I don't think there was anything right next to it. I think there was some like in front of it, but they were like a good distance away from it. So it's kind of off by itself in the back.
Oh, okay.
Like, and right behind it is trees and grass overgrowing and woods. Like, it's right on the edge of the woods where the cemetery is no longer there. So it's basically like the very last headstone before you go off into the woods.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was early 2000s. That's back when I was still, I think I just graduated school. So it was probably 22 years ago.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's my
Weird
only,
change story.
yeah, that's the only thing I can relate to the change thing. When you mentioned that, it made me think of that one.
Yeah, I think the kid had enough of picking up random change from places.
Yeah.
Um, so another place in the town, uh, behind the tavern, if you walk down the street past the tavern, uh, off to the left, there is a house that has part of the Underground Railroad attached to it. That all we know is that it used to be used for freeing slaves. Um, it was a church. That church burnt down. They rebuilt the church. The next church burnt down, got turned into a house, and that house burnt down. They rebuilt it again. It's still being used as a house. And the current owners, it looks weird. It's all stone, and they're very presidential look. It looks like a sand colored version of the White House with a giant stained glass window at the top. And the current owners keep having close calls with their appliances malfunctioning, and they're brand new appliances and they can't explain why.
Something to do with the electrical issues or
No,
something.
like they completely redid so the last fire was in the 80s, I believe, and they redid everything. Like every time there's been a fire, it has gutted the place. Like everything had to be completely redone. Coincidences, it's weird. And then
Yeah.
across the street from it, there was a small house. And in the early 2000s, there was a gentleman who had just moved in, and there was a table in the dining room. Only thing that was left from the previous owner was a table in the dining room, very old table. He had just moved in. He had furnished a house and he put stuff on the dining room table, had a nice setup and stuff, and went to work. Came home to find everything on the table knocked off the table. He's like, okay, weird. Puts everything back on the table, goes to bed, wakes up in the morning, and everything is off of the table. 2 times, okay, there's something going on. So he puts everything on the table and he watches. And the table starts violently shaking. Everything falls off the table, and he finds out that he takes the cloth off the table and he looks at the table, and the table was made using an old barn door. And anytime something was put on the table or the table was knocked on, the table would violently shake like it was being knocked on the other side, like somebody was slamming on it.
Is that from, you said it was a barn door?
Yes, it was one of those long, like sliding doors,
I know what you mean.
and
Is
it
that,
had been
I was going to ask, was it part of anything that had anything happen to it in the original barn?
like, so that's the thing. Nobody knew where it came from. The previous owner just left it there, which isn't the only item that the Historic Society has or knows of that has been left by previous owners. We'll get to that in a little bit. So a medium came in, or a psychic, and tried to make contact with whatever was on the other side of the table. And it was a farmer who had died and had been attached to his farm and just thought that he was trying to get back into his farm and didn't know that he had died. And the story is that they got the spirit to pass on. We don't know what happened to the table. I think the owner got rid of the table because he just didn't want to look at it anymore with everything that had happened.
Yeah.
Which leads to the second item. The second item was recently acquired by the Historic Society, and it was these homeowners had just bought this house, and they moved in, and there was only an antique wheelchair left. And by antique, I mean late 1800s wheelchair. All wood, very nice. And the homeowners were like, okay. Didn't think much about it until one night they stayed late working on the house and were about to leave as the sun was rising. And as the sun began to rise, the wheelchair moved itself from the back dining room all the way into the front room and sat itself in front of the main living room window looking out. And as the sun rose, the homeowner said that they saw the outline of an old man sitting in the chair.
Stories like that always, you don't ever know. Like, I want to think that if there is an afterlife, how is someone's spirit still sticking around? Like, why are they sticking around? Just because you have a haunting or residual, or it's just like their energy. It's hard to explain, but like the way I've always looked at paranormal is like, oh, there's ghosts, they're a spirit, they didn't cross over. But anymore, I'm starting to wonder if the energy itself is not different from someone's consciousness, their soul or whatever, but it's still like the residual burning into the, I don't know what to call it. I don't want to say ether, but like our world. You know what I mean?
So it could be, of course, you have the stone tape theory, which is when you have so much energy in a certain place that it just, you make a recording and the recording just plays.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have somebody who has unfinished business or that has a connection to a place because they enjoyed it so much. Either they enjoyed it so much or because there was so much pain brought there that it's anchoring them there. And as I've come to, it's only recently that I've started to get more and more into this stuff, and we'll get to that reason in just a short bit. But I think that a lot of people don't understand that just because somebody is passed on doesn't mean that they have finished everything, that they have made peace so far. A lot of people might die and still have stuff that's lingering on their consciousness that might keep them there. That's just what I think.
If anyone says different, if everyone thinks they have all the answers, I've always said take that with a grain of salt because I don't think anyone has 100% all the answers. I've just always wondered, and I don't mean to say this like negatively to anyone listening, but I recently said it on another episode, I think, but we all hope there's something after this. Like we all have that inkling, I think, inside of us that everyone wants to believe that there's something else. Like, and I don't know if that's just human nature to want to believe it. But what happens if there isn't? We would never really know because if you die, it's just, there's nothing. How would we know? And
That's terrifying. I
that's what I
just
was getting
think
ready to say.
that's
That
terrifying.
that is a very terrifying thing to have, and I think that's why everyone hopes there's something else because in our mind we can't accept the fact that if we die, there's just it's it. We're just gone. So I don't know. Like I said, if it's human nature, like our own consciousness, our soul, whatever you want to call it, our inner monologue, that is literally something that I've said years ago. I was like, what happens if we just die? I was like, we wouldn't even know. There's no afterlife. We didn't even know we died. And they were like, dude, shut up. And I was like, all right. Don't, I don't want to like make creeping people out or anything, but that's just sometimes where my mind goes. And it's like, man, that would really suck. But again, how would we even know?
I was listening to another podcast, and it was, of course, when you talk about EVPs and stuff like that, you draw in like, could it be real? Could it not be real? And stuff like that. But it was not just that podcast, but another podcast. It's weird when different people in different parts of the world ask things the same question, like different spirits, the same question, and the spirits respond in a like way where they're like, we're not allowed to talk about the afterlife,
Mm-hmm.
which is, you can always be like, well, that's incredibly vague, and why not, and stuff. It just brings up more questions, and I personally see things in a spiritual and scientific way. And I think that as we as a species continue to advance, hopefully start to make technological advancements that can allow us to start better understanding this stuff more.
Yeah, well, sometimes I get lost in my own thoughts about it. I'm just like, man, I don't want to think that way. I want to have hope that there's something more.
It will drive you insane if you think about it for too long.
I say the same thing when you try and rationalize space and the distances and everything else when it comes to stuff like that too. Like
Yeah, it's
it
we
makes my brain hurt.
every a lot of people think that they're worth so much more when we are dust floating through infinity. And there's so much for us to comprehend that we haven't even gotten started yet.
No, we barely scratched the surface of anything.
Again, we know more about space, which is saying a lot, than we do about our own oceans.
I don't even know if they even know everything about space. They make assumptions. They're guessing. That's what I kind of crack up when I think about stuff. They see a glimmer and they're saying it's trillions of miles away, like light years away. And because of the way this thing has a glimmer and a dimness, that means there's a planet around there. And they're talking about the distance away, judging by this light, but that light is so many millions of light years away that it might not even be there because that star may have burned up. So those planets that they're seeing might not even be there anymore. It's like, what? No, that makes sense.
So yeah, that's the thing about space is that you actually start talking about time travel once you get certain far out to a certain point. You actually have to start talking about time travel.
Yeah, because if this star that they're looking at took a million light years away, and what we're seeing is from a million years ago, the light we're seeing took a million years to get here. So that star could have burnt out, but we're still seeing the light of it. How is that possible? Like to me, that does
It's
it.
oh yeah.
It's
Hmm.
just strange to comprehend that. And why are they still in the same spots? Like we're floating around space, we're continuously moving space, but everything's interlocked. So you always see the Big Dipper in the same areas, and you always like everything. I don't know. Like I said, I don't
It
want to go off into the whole conspiracy realm, but to me, it's this whole space thing seems. I want to believe in space. I want to believe in aliens and all that stuff, but sometimes the scientific explanations make it more confusing than anything.
yeah, that's you just bring up more questions and stuff like that. So going back to chronological order, um, so grand Mike, we got off on the whole tangent about
Yeah, we did.
paranormal. It's fine. This happens when you're talking about the strange and unusual. Um, so grandfather gets back from Vietnam in 1970. He um, he and my grandmother and a few of their friends are driving through Jersey. They decide to take a dirt road off into the Pine Barrens because, of course, everybody knows about the tale of the Jersey Devil, especially with the history of our family. They're like, oh, why not give it a chance? Blah, blah, blah. They go out and they're driving around. And of course, thing about the Pine Barrens is when you're driving around the Pine Barrens, you got to watch out because there is quicksand, there are sand dunes, and things just don't look. Things might look flat, they're not flat. They get the car stuck. They get the car stuck at sundown, like the sun is setting. So my grandmother decides to stay back while my grandfather and the two of their friends walk to the nearest gas station, which is like 35 minutes away. an hour, somewhere in between there. And while they are off walking to this gas station, something begins running through the pines. The thing about the pines is there isn't anything big running around except deer. And what my grandmother describes is whatever it is was moving about 10 feet up off of the ground between the trees, like jumping from tree to tree. And she dealt with that for a solid hour and a half. And it was her on the floor of the car while whatever it was jumped back and forth over the car while growling.
Did you get a look at what it looked like?
So she wasn't able to get a look at it, but she could tell whatever it was substantially bigger than a raccoon, because whatever it was had weight and was hitting the trees with enough weight to move the tree. And these are trees that are about foot and a half in diameter. So there's some
Decent
force
size.
to that.
Yeah.
So, of course, after a while, it moves off, and the friends, my grandfather, come back, and she explains to him what happened, and they're like, of course, we leave you here, and there's nobody else to back you up, so maybe the legend's just getting to. That's number 2. So funny enough, summer of 2018, summer of 2018, I am pet watching for so I graduated high school and I was good friends with my teacher. My teacher goes away on vacation and they want me to watch their house. My teacher and their partner leave me in charge of the house, and there are 5 dogs, which are all rescues, and these dogs are scared of nothing. They are mean. They're mean to people they don't know, but they're great once they get to know you. They also have 1 cat. That'll be useful for later. So I'm house watching, and their house is in Morrisville, which is on the Delaware River. Where on the Delaware River? It is. I could walk out to the street and I can see where George Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas. That's where it is on the Delaware. So Trenton, New Jersey is right across. So it's late at night. I had just let the dogs out for the last time. So the house is 1 floor, and there is a small staircase that leads up to the guest room and a bathroom, and that is at the top of the house. There are no trees around the house. The next closest thing that would be to the house would be a garage, and that would be the neighbor's garage, and that is about 50 feet off to the side. So I let the dogs out, and they go out on the deck down into the backyard, and the backyard goes down a slope, and there's this brush out in the back. The dogs run out for the night, and I let them do their business. Well, not even 2 minutes later, they all come running back, and they're whimpering. They all run back into the house. And normally, they meander a little bit at night. It's strange. I think nothing of it. The backyard is pitch black. I can't see anything. Close up, shut the sliding glass door, lock it, go back inside, and nothing bothers me more than the fact that all the dogs are sitting in the center of the living room, and they keep looking at the windows. Like they're all huddled in a group, and they keep changing their attention to the different windows. And I'm like, okay, strange. I'm going to bed. So I usher them up the stairs and into the guest room. And the guest room has one window. And in an house is A-frame. So the window is right in the middle of the A-frame. So like right where the peak of the roof is. I crawl into bed and start to fall asleep when all of the dogs climb into the bed. And then I hear something hit the far end of the roof. Something rather heavy. I've been a firefighter for 10 years. I know what it sounds like when there are people above me walking on a roof. I hear something hit the roof, and then I hear creak, another footfall, and then as it slowly goes like teal, like toe to heel, and it progressively walks its way up the peak of the roof. Once it reaches the peak of the roof, whatever it is starts clawing. I'm thinking my mind's playing tricks on me because there's a bunch of pets in a house. Maybe it's the wind, maybe there's something, and I'm like, let me just check. So I get up and I turn the light on, and the scratching stops. Mind you, the scratching is coming from the middle of the room at the peak of the roof. The window is to my left, and the blinds are down, so nobody can see in, nobody can see out. Rule number 1 of horror movies: you don't look out the window of a second-story house when you're hearing weird stuff outside above you. So I go to the next thing, making sure all the pets are accounted for. All of the dogs are in the bed. The cat is freaking out and is like sitting in the corner in the cat bed, just looking at me. I'm like, okay, maybe the cat was pawing at the wall. Turn the light off, crawl back into bed. About a minute later, the scratching starts up again. Continues for about 2 more minutes, stops, and then the footfalls start again as it goes down the opposite side of the roof. And then I hear the weight lift from the roof. I'm like, okay, that was strange. Not as strange as what came next. That shed that was 50 feet away from the house, I hear whatever it was land on that roof. Needless to say, I checked out at that point.
Hmm. I would have too.
I'm like, okay, not unless something jumped or whatever. I I don't see how a person would do that.
How far
So,
was it?
50 feet.
Yeah, there's no way.
I'm like, oh, okay. And of course, the dogs are still freaking out, but they're like whimpering. They're not barking or anything. They're just tucked in the bed. If they could have dug out the bed to get any lower to the floor, they would have. So the next morning, I let them out. I'm looking up at the roof and everything. And the neighbor who owns the shed is looking at the shed. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then he looks at me and is like, I had gotten to know the neighbor at this point and is like, hey, did you happen to hear anything on my shed last night? Him asking that made the color of my face like drain. And that was all the answer he needed from me. So, of course, he's just like, you don't have to say anything. I heard it too. Chalked it up to an animal. Okay. So my teacher gets back from vacation and I explain the story to them and their partner. They explained to me that I explained the whole clawing at the roof and stuff like that. What I wasn't made aware of was that there was a ventilation, like a small metal vent that went into the house so that the air conditioners could pull from it. And that was above me in the center of the room where it was being clawed at. So they had somebody with the AC repair company come out to look at it, and they found that it was sometimes houses have plastic coverings for it, sometimes they're metal coverings. This was a metal covering, and the metal had been ripped apart and bent. And the person who looked at it said that a raccoon could have done that, but it had to have been one very big raccoon. So on
I don't,
top of it,
I don't see how a raccoon could go from one roof and then jump all the way to that shed. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
so the AC guy did not know the story.
Okay.
My teacher, however, once the AC repairman replaced the cover and stuff like that, explained to me that they had a partner. Well, not a partner, but a friend who was also a police officer in Jersey. And they had a route that was in the Pine Barrens. And that officer had seen some stuff. Didn't get into details, but had said that things are strange there. So, running joke is that I was the third person in my family to have an experience with the Jersey Devil. Their house got visited by the Jersey Devil. Do we know? Not really. Was I going to be stupid enough to open up the blinds and look out onto the roof? Quite frankly, I like my face.
Yeah, I wouldn't have looked out.
Yeah, there's certain things you just don't do. And I wasn't going partake in looking out on the roof like that. So that was that experience. And uh, one of the things I want to do in the near future is uh, I want to take a trip out to the old Leeds house. Um, the only thing left is the foundation, and just sort of go out there and see what happens because I'm curious.
Yeah. If you go out there, make sure to record some stuff. That way, anything strange happens, might be able to document it.
Of course, I've been looking into getting some nice. Well, that's the thing. GoPros, you can get GoPros that either a chest mount or a helmet mount, and the quality is pretty good. Especially when you're going through the wood and stuff like that. Having a handheld isn't that good. I'd rather have something that can be like, okay, so this is what I see. This is what you see.
I've thought about something, it may be overkill, but it would almost be like a 360-degree version. I don't know if they make 360-degree cameras, but I thought about putting like a GoPro on the front and back of like make a hat or something you would wear and you go walking. That way you're getting everything in front of you. So whatever you're seeing, you're going to record from that, but you're also going to be able to see what's behind you because sometimes people say they hear things come up from behind. So it kind of gives you a little bit of
They
best of both worlds.
do have something like that. It's like a dome and it goes out on a planar level. It's I'll have it's something I'll send you after we're done here. I know what you're talking about. They do have 360 cameras. I don't know how good they are because you sacrifice quality
Yeah,
for
the 300.
quantity.
Yeah. That's why I was talking about maybe having like a GoPro on the front and a GoPro on the back. That
Oh
way,
yeah, that. Hmm.
that way you're getting at least two different directions. And most of the time, if you can pan it to where it spreads out to the front, spreads out to the back, you're almost getting front and back to where it's almost 360. You might miss a little bit here on the sides, but I mean, unless someone wanted to have four cameras on their head, that might be a bit, that might be a bit overkill.
Yeah, a little too bulky. I mean, having a helmet with GoPro mounted on the front, GoPro mounted on the back, or you do chest
Hmm.
mount on the back, and shoulder mounts.
Yeah, I don't know how any of that works. I've wanted a GoPro, but I've never got one. I've never messed around with one. I have a cheap one sitting next to me that's not a GoPro. It's a knockoff Chinese version that I got for like $15. And the
How's how's the
the
quality on that
the recording quality looks like you recorded from a phone from 2004.
potato
We
quality? Yep.
we s- we taped it to my son's RC race car out back, and we're trying to do ramps and stuff with it. And I used Velcro to the bottom of it, and I Velcroed it to the RC car, and the quality is just god awful. You get what you pay for.
Yeah, that's the thing. You definitely get what you pay for. But
It's got one of those underwater cases too, so I've tested it out. It doesn't leak, so like, well, there's at least that. And they can record underwater. It's going to look ridiculously
even
bad, but
worse.
yeah, it's going to look terrible, but it'll go underwater.
Yeah. Speaking of underwater, that leads to a theory I have. So, um, I heard a while ago that the Jersey Devil legend had actually been around before the original lead story. The local native population in Jersey in the Pine Barrens would actually avoid the pines because they called it the Forest of the Dragon, which, if that is true, and they were calling it the Forest of the Dragon before the whole lead story, kind of makes you wonder.
Where'd they come up with, like, of all things, the dragon? It's a very specific name.
It's, of course, when you do the translation from the native tongue to English, you lose you have to like find the closest thing, and dragon was the closest thing because of what they were describing, some sort of nature spirit. But what I think is there are these holes in the Pine Barrens that lead to underwater like rivers and stuff like that, and there are air pockets underneath. Um, could it be possible that something lives underneath in the caverns? I would think possibly. I'm
Now you're kind of getting into my realm of thinking. I don't know how familiar you are with um the humanoid type creatures.
very.
There is
I
a if you look at caves and systems like that, there's been lots of reports of humanoid type creatures, and I wonder if they're not all interconnected to these cave systems because you've had the descriptions of people call them. I know the rake is a creepy pasta, but there is the white crawlers or white palers or whatever you want to call them. Pale
or
walkers,
the original
pale crawl.
Wendigo.
Yeah, like the
Hmm.
depictions of them, the Wendigo. Um, you've also had the Dover Demon. You've had your Kentucky Goblins. And I think
Hmm.
I talked about this recently. What if all that stuff that people are seeing is all the same thing? We're just calling them different things, but they're all based off the same things that were originally being seen by the Native Americans. They gave them different
Different
names.
offshoots and stuff like that,
Yes.
different subspecies. I
Because what if
was
they're just evolving? The reason they're pale is because they live in a cave system. So they're not, if you look at anything that lives in caves, for the most part, they look palish, I think. So if a humanoid lived in a cave system, wouldn't it kind of evolve to be that way? I don't know.
so leading on to this with the way that the Jersey Devil is described, and with what, if we're going by what the natives were describing, my personal thing is the Jersey Devil is some species of pterosaur. Fold up the wings, how it walks and everything sort of fits the look, especially if you look at some of the new uh, types that have been discovered since the early 2000s, and the different crests that they have could be mistaken for horns.
I've kind of wondered if, not to go off on the tangent of explaining it away, but aren't there certain type of owls that have like those weird, they're not ear, like it's their eyebrow area. Like it almost looks like they have horns on them. Trying to think of what they're
Oh,
called.
the horned owl.
Is that
I
what it?
actually think it's called a horned owl.
Okay. I don't know if that's something that they could have been seen because I thought I've read before that they're not necessarily native to this area, but they've been seen every once in a while, like on the East Coast. So I'm wondering if maybe some
Uh,
people were
I can
misidentifying it as
tell
that.
you, I can tell you this right now: 19 to 35 inches tall. That would not be
Big enough.
that would not be at all big enough for what was walking up that roof.
Hmm.
And and especially what leaves behind the hoof marks,
No.
especially through Bristol in the early 1900s and stuff like that. It's some of the claws that the petrosaurs have, especially the knuckles and stuff like that, would look U or V shaped if you're going off the wing.
Often wondered if this is something I want to interview someone that's actually seen like a modernized dinosaur. Um, as a
You're
kid,
going to look Australia.
yeah.
Australia has reports.
For some reason, I actually can
Um,
believe that Australia would harbor a dinosaur because I see the size of their spiders over there, and I feel like they're Jurassic spiders as well. So I could see a
you
dinosaur
gotta
creeping around.
think like the majority of the population just lives on the coast.
Yep.
The I've literally just had this conversation with somebody. The interior of Australia is full of farmers and the other tinfoil tales, as we all know, the
The
drug
cookers.
makers, yeah, the cookers. Um, but you have reports of things like the bunyip.
I'm not real familiar with
Who's to
any
say
of the
that?
lore from Australia.
So bunyip has a lot of different descriptions, but some of them are very dinosaur-esque. They're like a pond, like they would eat cattle and stuff like that. They're like pond lurking dinosaurs. Some of them are described. Other ones get off into the very strange descriptions. But either that or Arizona, because Arizona has a lot of Thunderbird, quote unquote, um, sightings, and by Thunderbird, like pterosaur.
Hmm.
Um,
I know I haven't listened to the episode. I actually heard it yesterday. That one of the other podcasts that I'm friends with, he had an episode, I guess, last year sometime of people seeing I guess it'd be like a pterodactyl looking thing in New Mexico. I mean, he mentioned it on his recent episode about seeing weird things like in a like time loop or something, and how that was just a part of the conversation. So I was like, now I have to go back and find that episode so I can listen to it. But like three guys were driving and they said they all seen the same thing, like some kind of a dinosaur relic flew in front of their vehicle on the road. Like,
I th- I can talk on hours on end about especially like ley lines and stuff like that. And just out west, all the weird stuff, I genuinely have feel it has something to do with the mineral deposits.
it is very weird. I've been out there. I've actually been to the Four Corners. I've been to Sedona. I've been up through in Oregon, and then Hood River area, where is a very squatchy neighborhood. Um, I've been in all those areas, and it definitely feels. So I'm here in Indiana. It definitely feels like a completely different world out west than what I'm used to here.
The That's actually another thing. You just brought up Squatch. Jersey has had a so up north in the Poconos and in Jersey. I do camping in Jersey. Jersey has had an uptick in Bigfoot sightings. So camping season's coming up. Who knows?
Yeah. There's a lot
Uh,
of weird things out there for sure. And
mm,
I have a 10-foot metal cutout of a Sasquatch. I drilled it into my pole barn out back. So every time I look out back, I see its silhouette out there. I was originally going to put it out at the end of my property over by the field. So when cars drove by, they'd look out in the distance, they could see it. Make people see
gotta
it.
put like a piece of rebar on the back of it, and like put a few tapers onto it and put it in the ground.
It used to have them on there and it broke off.
Mm.
I used to have it out front, and for some reason the ground sunk and the wind blew it and popped the welds off. So I just cut off the things, and now I just bolted it to my barn.
Yeah, I mean, hey, at least you get to see them every day.
You know, no one else gets to see it because it's out in my backyard, but it used to be out in the front yard. So all my neighbors are like, "Oh, it's that crazy neighbor." Yep, the town loco.
Next thing you need to do is get the what is it? Some garden catalog has a Bigfoot statue. Put the Bigfoot statue in the front lawn.
I've looked at those and they're expensive.
Yeah, the smaller ones are doable, but if you're going to go all out, might as well get the life size one. Air quotes.
Yeah, and have to have a truck bring it out because it weighs a couple 100 pounds. Well,
Before we get anywhere else, and after we did the whole thing with the underground crawlers and stuff, when I was referring to those underground caverns and the water holes and stuff like that,
mm-hmm.
around the time that there was an uptick, like when I had my sighting, a few other people had sightings. The local Air Force base, Fort Dix McGuire, somebody said that they had groups of soldiers going out and they were starting to close off entrances to these holes around the same time that those sightings were happening.
It
Oh
is
no,
a
let that
little
yeah.
convenient timing wise.
I'm like, okay. And especially it would make sense with the pines. Every once in a while we get wildfires and stuff like that, and the base does controlled burns. That those caverns would provide safety to something that would live in the pines.
I feel like there could be possibly all sorts of things out there because no one really understands unless you go out into it just how vast a lot of these woods are. Like there is so much out west. You go up into Canada, there are so many remote areas to where people are just not around. And even in these pine barrens and everything else, like I don't know how big they really are, but who's to say there isn't something out there that we don't understand or people might know about it and they don't want others to know about it? What's the reasoning for the secrets? Who knows? Could be any type of reasoning, I guess, but I do think people are seeing something, and what that is I couldn't tell you, but I don't think everyone's just imagining things.
No, absolutely not. You got to think that some of these things have been, especially Bigfoot and other stuff, have been seen coinciding with humanity for this entire time. And if it's written history like that, you got to think there's just so much. You just, not only that, but like when the New World was discovered and like all of the voyages and stuff constantly back and forth from Europe to the Americas, all of the captains who saw sea serpents and stuff like that, they're like, and they're written in the journals.
There's been a
All
lot
sorts of random
of
stuff.
history involving Sasquatch type things. Obviously, the Native Americans had their versions, and even the settlers had stories of these things too. It's weird to me that no matter where you're at, almost every country, like continent or whatever, there are tales of Sasquatch type creatures or some big humanoid hairy humans. And
Mm.
how would they how are these stories being passed around? How's these legends being passed around, or the old folklore or whatever? Like when they're thousands of miles apart. How do you? I relate this back to like when we were building pyramids. What gave everyone the idea to build pyramids thousands of miles apart? Like I feel like there's some sort of communications going on, and I think they were all seeing some of the same things. Obviously, there was a giant upright walking primate in China they call the Gigantopithecus. So I'm not saying that's what Sasquatch is, but if that could exist, why couldn't a Sasquatch exist? Because, like, who's to say that they're not still remnants of that or an offshoot of it? Who knows?
That's the exact thing, and we keep finding new offshoots of Homo sapien and offshoots that came before that. And who's to say that we're not seeing a little bit of both? We're seeing an offshoot of Gigantopithecus and seeing an offshoot of Homo sapien that had gone more primitive. What was it? I again, I love history. I'm the historian at the Legion, and I have stories about other militaries and their encounters with stuff like the Soviet Union had an encounter during World War II. I forget where it was, but a group of Soviet soldiers shot and killed a caveman.
I think I've heard this.
Yeah, they shot and killed a caveman. They were going and trying to get German troops out of uh, the mountains and stuff like that, and they kept going up and up further in the mountains, and they got to a cave, and this humanoid creature came out, and they shot it, and by the what was described was caveman like, and then that also somewhat coincides with the Soviets were trying to make human guerrilla soldiers at one point.
Mm-hmm.
The again, World War II, World War One, Allies, Axis, communists were all trying to make super soldiers and wonder weapons out of weird stuff. Who knows?
Yeah,
Makes it think.
definitely does. We're getting close to 2 hours, so I think we can.
Yeah, we really pushed this one.
Yeah. So you try and keep them an hour to an hour and a half. I don't try and go over 2 hours because my hosting service doesn't like making videos unless they're under 2 hours. So probably gonna wrap this one up here. I mean, there's plenty more to talk about. We can always have another follow-up episode for more stuff you want to talk about on sometime in the future.
Oh, I'd love to.
But well, do you want to mention anything to the audience before we leave? I don't know if you want people to reach out to you or contact or anything like what you do. I usually, if I talk to other people who have like a podcast or a group or something, I let them kind of let them know where they can reach
So,
out to you at.
I'll give you the information and stuff later on. We'll maybe do an update. But
I can do it in the show notes or whatever.
yeah, in the show notes or something. But currently, I'm in the process of putting together an event for the town that a first weekend of October, uh, sort of a big event, live music, a beer garden, vendors in the town. Um, there will be ghost tours. There's going to be all sorts of stuff, sort of raise awareness for it, have people learn about the history of the town and stuff. So, though your fans that are out in Pennsylvania, if you're willing to stop by, um, once we get that up and rolling, we'd love to have you. You know, who
Yep.
knows? Maybe you'll have an interesting event happen while you're out on one of our ghost tours.
Awesome. Sounds fun. Make sure to let me know once you get all that squared away, and I'll update it into the show notes. So for anyone listening that's interested in that, you can go in there and I'll find out all the information regarding it.
Okay, well, I'll definitely do that. And again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Have a great night.
Yep, you too. Remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey, and until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.